The working capital requirement of a concern is influenced by large number of factors. Expansion, we require more capital because you have to put the money on the raw material. Working capital cycle in a manufacturing concern begins with the purchase of raw material. This is important, purchase of raw material. The dividend policy of a firm also influence the requirement of working capital. Other factors such as operating efficiency, import policy, banking facilities. Hello my dear students, I am Dr. B.S. Subramania, called by name Dr. BSS, Professor in Commerce and Management, Vidhyaashram First Aid College, a Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. In this session, I am going to have Financial Management 4th semester, Unit 6, Session 3 of BBA in favor of working capital requirement. Today, I am going to discuss not a problem, only theory. What are the factors if influence the working capital? What is working capital? Current asset minus current liability is a working capital. There are two types of capital. One is long term, one is called short term. Day-to-day expenditure is to be maintained by a capital is called working capital. Current asset minus current liability. I am going to explain what are the factors which influence the working capital. That point to be bear in mind while you are doing the working capital. We'll move on now. Factor influencing working capital. The point here, factor influencing working capital. The working capital requirement of a concern is influenced by large number of factors. Which are the factors? They include nature of business. First point, nature of business. Size of business. This is important. First is nature of business. Next, size of business. Next, length of operating cycle. Growth and expansion of business. Length of production cycle or manufacturing process. Seasonal variation. Working capital cycle. Rate of stock turnover. Credit policy. Each one we have to explain small bit. Business cycle. Earning capacity. Dividend policy. Price level changes. Other factors. So 14 points to be explained. This will ask for 15 marks. So we'll go one by one. We'll move on. Nature of business. The working capital requirement of a firm largely depend upon nature of business. Which type of business? Public utility undertaking such as electricity, water supplies, railways, need very little amount of working capital. This is called public utility concern. Which are public utility concern? One is electricity, one is water supplies, one is railway section. Need very little amount of working capital since they supply service on cash basis only. So they require less working capital. On the other hand, manufacturing concern like steel, cotton textile, cement, etc. These factories require large amount of working capital. Whereas, especially for public utility concern, we require less working capital. On the other hand, manufacturing concern like steel, cotton textile, cement, etc. require large amount of working capital because they have to invest large sum of in current asset like inventory. Inventory is nothing but stock. Receivable means bills receivable, debtor, cash, etc. Similarly, trading concern also requires relatively large amount of working capital because they invest amount on stock in trade. This is important. So here we are discussing two types. One is called service motive, one is called manufacturing concern. In service motive, we require less working capital. Whereas in manufacturing concern, we require more working capital because they have to invest more money on especially textile. This is our working capital. So there are two types here. One is service motive, One is manufacturing concern. Service motive require less working capital, whereas manufacturing concern require more working capital even for trading concern. This is the first point, nature of the business. Second one, size of business or scale of operation. Size of business or scale of operation also determines the amount of working capital required to an entity. So here, the length of operation also determines the amount of working capital. Large size of business organizations require large amount of working capital by virtue of their size and operation. Large business require large working capital. Small business require small working capital. On the other hand, small size of business require smaller amount of working capital. This is important. Here, large size business require large amount of working capital. What's called the size of the business is small, they require smaller amount of working capital. This is your size of business. Number 3, length of operating cycle largely influence the requirements of working capital. Generally, longer the length of operating cycle, larger the amount of work. Larger the length of operating cycle, we require larger amount of working capital. So it takes more number of months, more number of days, then we require more working capital. On the other hand, shorter is the length of operating cycle, smaller is the amount of working capital. If the operating cycle duration is less, we require less working capital. If the duration is more, we require more working capital. So operating cycle goes, if the duration is more, we require more working capital. If the duration is less, we require less working capital. For example, in case of shipbuilding, aircraft manufacturing, railways, etc., more amount of working capital is only an example. If we are taking the shipbuilding, aircraft manufacturing, railways require more working capital because the process of conversion of inputs to output will take more time. Conversion of raw material to finished goods, input to output, it takes more time. Until the output is ready for service, the manufacturer is required to invest more on raw material, labor, and so till it is completed for sale. They have to invest the money on raw material, on labor, and service cost. Hope you understand. Fourth one, growth and expansion of business. Growth and expansion of business also influence the requirement of working capital. Generally, the growing and expanding firms require large amount of work. If you want to expand the business, you have to put the more money, working capital. So that what they say, if they go for expansion, we require more working capital when compared to the firm which result in less growth and expansion. If we do not go for expansion, we require less working capital. If we go for expansion, we require more capital because we want to expand, we want to expose ourselves. Today is a competition world. So we have to compete with other firm. You have to make the expansion of the business. If you want to expand the business, we require more capital. Simultaneously, the result means if you invest more money, the result will also be more. You will get the more profit also. But here, the thing we are explaining, whether we require more capital or less capital. Expansion, we require more capital because you have to put the money on the raw material. You have to pay to the laborers. So other things are there. So that when you go for expansion, we require more capital. This is the growth and expansion of business. Number 5, length of production cycle or manufacturing process. Length of production cycle or manufacturing process influence the requirement of the working capital. If the length of production cycle or manufacturing process is larger, the length of production is larger, then the amount of working capital requirement will also be more. So if the length of the, what's called here, production is more, we require more working capital. If the length of production cycle is larger, working capital tied up on raw material. So that whatever the raw material that is have been tied up in the raw material, the amount has been tied up in the raw material, work in progress and other expenses, therefore more amount of working capital is required. On the other hand, if the production cycle is less, little amount of working capital is enough because working capital is not tied up for larger period. This is important. If the amount is tied up in raw material, we require more working capital. If the amount is not tied up in the working, what's called in the enough because working capital, little bit of working capital is enough because it is your amount is not tied up. If your amount is tied up in the raw material, work in progress, and other expenses, we require more working capital. Number C, seasonal variation. In certain cases, raw material is not available. When the raw material is not at all available throughout the year, but they require for production continuously. We require raw material continuously, but due to some reason we could not get the raw material. Then the question raises, how to get the raw material? How much money should be put in the raw material? Because unless production will stop. So that this is the case where seasonal variation comes. In such a case, large amount of working capital is needed to procure such raw. If you want to purchase raw material, we have to pay more. For example, if the cost of raw material per kg is rupees 100 regularly, but when the raw materials are not available, the demand goes more, the per kg goes to rupees 250. If you want to purchase a raw material, you have to pay how much money now? 250 per kg. But previously it's only 100 rupees. Because there is a shortage of raw material, we are not in a position to procure the raw material. Then you have to pay more. 100 becomes 250. Cash is a part of working capital. So that in the seasonal variation, we require more working capital to purchase the raw material. If it does not purchase the raw material, your production stops. When the production stops, automatically the factory has to be closed down. So, thus seasonal variation in supply of raw materials also determines the amount of working capital. Seventh one, working capital cycle in a manufacturing concern begins with the purchase of raw material. This is important. Purchase of raw material. And ends with the realization of cash from the sale of finished goods. So conversion of raw material into finished goods is one of the working capital cycle. We put the raw material, we'll get the finished goods there. The speed with which the working capital completes one cycle determines the requirement of working capital. Longer the period of cycle, larger the requirement of larger the period, more working capital is required. On the other hand, shorter the period cycle, smaller amount of is required. Larger the amount of cycle, more working capital is required. Smaller the operating cycle, we require small working capital. Depends upon the we say operating cycle. Shorter the period, little bit working capital. Longer the period, more working capital. So we are converting raw material into finished product. It takes time. Operating cycle will take time. Eighth one, rate of stock turnover, rate of sale also determines the amount of working capital requirement. A firm having a high rate of stock turnover means high rate of sale, will need lower amount of working capital. On the other hand, a firm having a low rate of stock turnover, low rate of sale, require more working capital. More sale, less working capital. Less sale, low rate of sale, we require more working capital. For example, a firm which deals in high fashion jewelry, this is important, may face less amount of stock turnover when compared to the groceries. Therefore, fashion jewelry require large amount of working capital. Ninth one, The credit policy adopted by a firm determines the amount of working capital. This is important. The credit policy adopted by a firm determines the amount of working capital. When the firm follows liberal credit policy and sells goods and services on credit, require more working, because now once you go with the credit, we have to wait our when the goods have been sold to customer on credit, customer become the debtor, we becomes the creditor. We have to collect the money from the debtor. It takes time. We require more working capital. On the other hand, if the firm follows strict credit policy in its operation, then it requires less working capital because the amount is not tied up in debtors. This is important. And bills receivable. In case of firm which follows strict credit, if we have a credit policy, there are so many firms are there, they will do only cash and carry. But in India, 90% is the credit sales. So when you make the credit sale, the customer becomes the debtor and we becomes the creditor. We have to wait. We have to collect the money from the customer. It takes time. So that time we require more working capital. But that's why we say that strict credit policies should be adopted. We can say to the customer, you have to pay within 10 days. Unless penalty has been put. Has been charged. This is strict policy. So for every customer, 10 days time will be given. On the 11th day, we'll charge penalty on whatever the goods have been sold. Strict policy. So this is where we require. In India, generally we go on credit policy. This month we'll make the sale. Next month we are going to collect. By chance, if the collecting date is late, then only we can assume that we'll put the penalty on the customers. Business cycle. Business cycle exhibits the feature of expansion and contraction in general business activity. It is characterized by booms and depression. This is important. Characterized by booms and depressions. During boom period, when the business is prosperous, important, there is a need for larger amount of working capital due to increased sale, rise in prices, and scope for expansion of business activity. So in the case of boom period, there is a heavy demand for your article, more sales is required, more amount to be invested. On the other hand, during depression, when the business experience decrease in trend, here increase in trend, here decrease in trend, the business contract, sale decline due to decrease in demand and difficult to collect dues from debtor. In this situation, firm require lesser amount of working capital. So in the boom period, we require more working capital. In the depression period, we require less working capital. 11th one, earning capacity. Some firms have a good earning capacity due to the position they enjoy in the market. On account of this reason, their sale turnover will be higher and cash collection is also high. Will be higher and cash collection also high. There is no risk of bad debt. This is important. And no poor recovery rate. Generally, such firm need less working capital. On the other hand, if a firm lacks good earning capacity and fails to build good image, then it requires more amount of working capital. 12th one, dividend policy. The dividend policy of a firm also influence the requirement of working capital. So what is dividend? The total profit of the concern minus expenditure. This is profit available There are two types of shareholder. One is preference shareholder, then is equity shareholder. Preference shareholders are temporary shareholder, whereas equity is called permanent shareholder. Total profit of the concern minus expenditure. Whatever the amount is available, first paid to the preference shareholder capital, their dividend, what's the profit per head, whatever is left over, that is divided by number of shareholders, that is a dividend to equity shareholders. The dividend policy of a firm also influences the requirement of working capital. If a firm maintain a steady or high rate of cash dividend, irrespective of its profit position, it needs more working capital. On the other hand, if a firm retain a large part of its total profit for business operation, then it needs less working capital. Here, if a firm maintain a steady high rate of cash dividend, irrespective of its profit position, they declare the dividend is about 15%, whatever may be profit, but we have to pay how much dividend? 15, irrespective of the profit position. It needs more working capital. On the other hand, if the firm retain large part of its total profit for business operation, then it needs less working capital. 13. Price level changes. Price level changes also affect the requirement of working capital. Generally, the rising prices will force the firm to maintain large amount of working capital, as large amount of funds are required to maintain steady current asset. So we require current asset minus current liabilities working capital. On the other hand, falling prices may not force the firm to maintain large amount of working capital. So if the funds required to study the current asset, we require more working capital. On the other hand, falling prices may not force the firm to maintain large amount of working capital. Last one, other factors such as operating efficiency, import policy, banking facilities, importance of labor, etc., also affect the requirement of working capital. I've explained about 14 points. So you must remember all one by one, at least heading you write. On the heading, you have to explain about 3 or 4 lines about that particular point. That is important. So that 14 points are most important. You take into consideration here in the beginning, I told you, see that you have to write like this. Which are the points are nature of business, size of business, length of operating cycle, growth and expansion of business, length of production cycle, seasonal variation, working capital cycle, rate of stock turnover, credit policy, business cycle, earning capacity, dividend policy, price level changes, other factor. You must take into account this point. You have to explain one by one. Hope I've explained everything here. All the factors I've explained, all the 14 points I've explained very detailedly. Definitely it will come from the examination point of what are the factors which determines the working capital. One problem will come on the working capital. One theory also comes in the working capital. What are the factors which determine the working capital? The 14 points to be bear in mind. Hope we understand. We'll meet in the next session with one more problem of working capital. Till then, goodbye. Meet in the next session.